Well, I'm Phil Little, owner of the West Coast Detectives International, a 104-year-old global security firm. I stepped out of the old church into the crisp December air of Geneva. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me with a soft thud that echoed like a prayer. This place had been my sanctuary for years, a majestic 1700 sanctuary just across from my European office. Inside, the stillness wasn't empty. It screamed with the presence of something greater, wrapping around me like a calm in the storm of international shadows I chased for a living. Lake Geneva sparkled below the hills, the city rising in elegant rows of streets and alleys packed with history, shops, and secrets. I loved the it was visible from my flat as soon as I walked out of the office. One of my favorite things to do is to walk the streets of the hills of Geneva and discover hidden shops and restaurants. I run West Coast Detectives International, and our firm goes back with roots stretching over a century. But I didn't start out chasing terrorists across continents. It began in law enforcement, where I first tasted the power of intelligence gathering. Then came that trip in 1977, crossing from northern Israel into southern Lebanon. What I saw there, the training camps run by groups like the PLO, changed everything. Materials recovered from those camps showed terrorists from all over the world, yes, even the U.S., being trained and sent home. The media spun it like a fight for a Palestinian homeland. But if that was true, why export killers worldwide? It didn't add up. That was the spark. I dug deeper and uncovered an international web. Extremists aiming to topple democracies, replace them with totalitarian rule or Sharia law. From that moment, global terrorism became my obsession. Its goals, its methods, its hidden hands in Europe, the Middle East, and everywhere. Building a network wasn't easy. I needed boots on the ground in every corner of the world. Over the years, I set up stations staffed by former law enforcement, counterterrorism experts, and military insiders from those countries themselves. One of the highlights was in 1982, I went on an Interpol connection trip, a 3 week survey journey with 50 U.S. law enforcement pros across England, France, Germany, GSG 9, and Italy. We studied the Munich Olympics massacre of 1972 to harden security for the 1984 games in Los Angeles. That trip didn't just give me intel, it gave me recruits for my European and Middle Eastern ops. Then came my first seminar in 1986 in Los Angeles with 250 ground level cops, no brass, no press, just real talk on the rising threat from the Middle East and Europe that hadn't yet reached American shores, with experts on the ground who worked all kinds of terrorist activities from England, France, and Germany. They connected. And then these agents were able to be available for quick calls from the locals in Los Angeles if there was a bomb threat or suspects. They didn't have to wait for all the red tape of going through Interpol. My reputation grew. Governments called when their channels clogged. State Department, the OSAS, the Overseas Security Advisory Council, launched in 1989, became my lifeline for navigating unfamiliar turf. By the late 90s, my Geneva office was the heartbeat of it all. Middle East executives and officials treated this city like a second home, making it a hub. It was elegant, laid back, old world charm with that touch of Alpine Christmas. I loved it. Back in the office that afternoon, the encrypted KL7 phone in my bag chirped, the one reserved for high stakes calls from guys like Dixon. Dixon, with White House access, had seen it all. He never spooked. He only rang when the official machine was too slow. Where are you? How fast can you get to Vienna? He skipped, asking any pleasantries. I'm in Geneva. December. It'll be freezing in Vienna. What's a fire? Start packing. MI5 grabbed a Saudi at the Heathrow airport on a routine check. He was booked for New York using a passport from a small Southwest European country. Number didn't flag on Interpol. Turns out 4 months ago, 1,500 blank passports vanished from that country's embassy in Vienna. The Brits squeezed a guy. He's just a mule, a test run. Somebody gave him a free vacation to see if the docks cleared customs. If he's telling the truth, they're watching Heathrow right now, already shifting to plan B. If not, we could have dozens more already in the US or elsewhere. Dixon's voice carried that edge. I knew official channels are dragging. I need back channel speed. You in? I reminded him about our family ski trip to Vail after the holidays. Passports or not, you're still rolling down that slope like a runaway train. He laughed. We hung up. I booked a morning flight and made 2 calls. First to Alexa, my go-to in Vienna. Beautiful, sharp, Russian blood running through her veins, with a father who knew every legal and illegal pulse in Eastern Europe. If the passports had any East Bloc tie, she'd sniff it out. We'd meet at the Kugelmeer restaurant, her favorite spot. She liked the outdoor setting after late nights. Guaranteed to put her in the right mood. Next, Mario, director of Austria's SASA Militia, their counterterrorism and counterintelligence arm. We'd met over dinner months back. He already knew the case and suspected an inside job at the embassy. We set a meet at my hotel the next evening. The flight to Vienna was uneventful, but the city felt different in winter. Elegant streets dusted with the promise of snow, old world grandeur wrapped in a chill that matched the streets. Winter activities in Vienna were elegant and warmth from every corner. Alexa dropped into the seat across from me at an outside table at Fuggemeyer, sunglasses perched low, but looking like she'd just rolled in from a long night at the clubs. Do you know what time it is? She said, shooting me that trademark look. You agreed yesterday, I reminded her. Well, that was before my late morning, she smirked. Coffee? Eh? She raised an eyebrow. You have to ask? After her first sip and a few sarcastic jabs about my beauty sleep schedule, I leaned in. What have you heard about those stolen passports from the embassy last September? She slumped back, sunglasses sliding up. Old news, Phil. I thought you were here about the nukes. My pulse kicked up. You're slipping, old man. Need to get out more, she grinned. Everyone knows it was a clerk, Marciano. Short, fat, bad dancer. Weakness for old wines and young men. Blackmail or payoff? Probably both. Inside job? No question. We talked passports, possible East European angles. I slipped her an envelope thick with cash to keep her and her father, Demetria, motivated. If it ties to the nukes, we talk. Right now, it's about the passports. Lunch wrapped, but the air felt heavier. Whoever stole those 1,500 passports wasn't done. Masadi Mule was just the opening act. And if the nukes were in play, this was bigger than one missing batch of travel documents. The real hunt was just beginning in the snow-dusted alleys of Vienna. And whatever Plan B looked like, it was already in motion. Vienna, shadows to a Paris firestorm. The afternoon light was falling over Vienna as I pushed back from the cafe table. The last notes of Alexa's whisper still ringing in my ears. She had painted a picture of Marcelino, the embassy clerk with shaky hands and secrets too big for his modest paycheck, flipping through the back alleys like a ghost. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just theft. This was a breach that might rewrite borders, smuggle terror, or vanish into the shadows. I left her with a nod, and a promise the hunt was on. As I watched Alexa walk away, the vision of a prior snowy Christmas scene came to mind. My first meeting with this young, beautiful Russian girl. She was showing me the city, and as we walked the snowy streets, she was in a fur coat and cap. She took my arm and looked at me with those big eyes and said, "I'm going to Cuba in a couple weeks. I will be your spy there." I looked at her and said, "I don't have spies." And she squeezed my arm and said, "Oh, I know." He has proven to be one of the most capable agents I had on my team. I felt blessed and thankful for the gift of good, talented people. That evening at 7 p.m. sharp, a knock echoed through my hotel suite. Mario stepped in, file folded thick as a brick under his arm. The city lights glittered beyond the tall windows like scattered diamonds on a black velvet. Over room service, steaks and red wine, we poured over the list. My finger stopped on one number, the exact passport MI5 had snatched at Heathrow. "These are the right ones," I said, voice low, "but 1,499 more are out there. Who's holding them? And how many have already slipped into the wrong hands?" Mario's eyes met mine. We rattled the trees hard. As I looked out the hotel window over the city, I closed my eyes and said, "What are you planning? What are your motives?" Tried to put myself in the mind of those ones that held those passports. Sleep did not come easy. The next morning, 9 a.m. sharp, I was inside the American Embassy. Coffee streamed in my hand as a regional security officer and Robert, the consular office whose sharp eyes screamed CIA. I kept Alexa's intel close, feeding them just enough to watch their reactions. We talked about a number of scenarios, and I said I would like to be able to talk to the suspect Marcelino. I suspect there is a reason that they are not giving out much information about the passport's disappearance. Robert looked at the RSO and for a minute, all was quiet, and then he said, "A non-government person might be able to get in." A few minutes later, I was set up with an 11 a.m. meeting at the target embassy. I took it. At 11:05, I sat across from Roberto in a sterile office that smelled of old paper and older secrets. He looked like a man who had buried more bodies than he'd admit. When I dropped Marcelino's name, his face froze, like a mast cracking under pressure. "He's in custody," he finally said, denying anything. I jumped in. "What has been done to find his cracks?" "I suspect he has some weaknesses." Roberto was stalling, and I kept pressing, and finally he said, "I will have to get approval for you to talk to him." Roberto vanished for approval. While I waited, I fired a secure text to Alexa. "Get your father, Dmitri, on the line. I want everything on Marcelini, especially Hugo." Dmitri, the ex-Russian banker who knew every illegal thread in Vienna was gold. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with the intel I needed. "Hugo, the young man Marcelino couldn't afford to expose." And they led me downstairs. The cell was surprisingly civilized, locked, monitored. No dungeon, though. Marcelino sat there, pale and sweating. I started soft. Family, friends, hobbies. Then I dropped a name like a grenade. Hugo. His lips quivered. His Adam's apple bobbed like it was trying to escape. I let the silence stretch until it screamed. "Help yourself," I said quietly, "and Hugo stays out of it." He broke. In a hoarse whisper, he gave it up. The contact list, the passport numbers, the false bottom drawer in his desk, everything. 15 minutes later, Roberto, who was listening from the outside, burst in with the list and notes on the buyers. "Probably a dead end," he muttered. "But dead ends have a way of exploding." But it was pay dirt. And we now had all the passport numbers with some names of Marcelino's contacts who would be the bottom level, probably no lead to the mastermind. Back at the hotel, my encrypted phone screamed to life. Nixon from the States. No pleasantries. Another passport just surfaced in Paris. You need to be there yesterday. Plane's waiting at the FBO. Get moving. Time is money, Phil. I was already grabbing my go bag. Wheels up, mid flight. I called my Paris contact at the French National Police. By the time we touched down at Charles de Gaulle, Detective Delfort was waiting. He walked me to the one way glass. He was not happy I was there. He made it clear he was just following orders and I was a nuisance. Inside sat the Lisbon based fabric importer from Saudi Arabia, looking bored in cuffs. He isn't talking, Delford said. About that time, another detective came in carrying a DVD and said our boy inside had a chance meeting with a maintenance worker. He put the DVD in the player. Up came a grainy airport footage. Afawadi went to departure boards, oversized salesman's case at his feet. A maintenance worker, who turned out to be Abdul Adora, rolls up with his cart, wheels by a trash can, and swaps the briefcase in one fluid, invisible motion. Identical case left behind. My blood ran cold. Which one's real? I asked. Delfor smiled without humor. Forensics just found the false bottom, $250,000 US, and Abdullah's shift just ended. I told Delford, I'm going with the surveillance team. He said no. I said yes. Get the approval. In 5 minutes, Delford came back and said, I don't know who you are, but I was told to let you do what you wanted. I said, thank you. I insisted on riding with the surveillance team. And while waiting for the team to get assembled, I sent a message to my contact, Jean, at the French National Police and said, I need 2 motorcycle surveillance agents on the surveillance of the airport. Jean said that he would put them on the team from the airport's frequency so they could intercept. The 2 motorcycle operators, Newton and a partner on BMW F650s, are in the loop. Good thing they were. Abdullah was not an amateur. He moved slowly. As someone not concerned about his surroundings, but all the time, he was doing evasive actions to check for a tail. The team from the airport were overconfident, sloppy. Now, Adal snipped a police tail out of the grocery store's back door while they were sitting out front thinking all was secure. I had planned for something like this. And I told the team I was with I would find my own way back to the airport. About that time, Newton's voice cracked in my earpiece. I've got him. Fortunately, I'd had Newton and the other agent watching the back. He's leading us on a dance, backtracking stores, alleys. He's finally settled. 17 Rue de Moulins, upper middle class house, not the home of a janitor. I called John at the police headquarters and said I needed a car to pick me up and get me to the suspect's address. I called Delfort. We need an entry team now. And I gave him the address. Within 30 minutes, I was at the address and got a briefing from Newton, my lead agent. 30 minutes later, an unmarked sedan pulled up, and it was the entry team supervisor. We talked about an entry and settled on 3 a.m. Now we wait. The raid van was parked a street over. By 3:30 a.m., the raid van was humming with quiet fury. Heat images showed 3 people sweep inside the location. Power lines cut, silent entry, night vision goggles, flipped down. I watched from the van as black-clad operators melted over the stone wall like ghosts. Locked, pop, alarm, bypassed. 3 rooms breached in perfect sync. locks, and tranquilizers ready. We got the all clear and went inside. The team separated the suspects into different rooms for questioning. We swept the house. Who neat? Catalog fresh. In the wine cellar. Prohibited for good Muslims, but perfect cover. 1832 Chateau Montrachet. Bottles gleamed like liquid gold. James Bond would have approved. The radiation meter that Jack from Hazmat had started chirping. Not the wine, I said. The wall. Something isn't right. I dropped to my knees, ran fingers along the rack, found the catch. The entire section swung open like a vault into not an 8 by 12 room. On a back table along the back wall were 8 silver briefcases, locked, every one of very hot from the meter. File drawers next to them, boxes after box of passports. 6 boxes of 50 each, we counted later. 1,488 recovered, 12 still missing. Herbert clapped my shoulder in the dim light. Merry Christmas, Phil. And now, steal this room until the hazmat team gets here. I pulled all the team together inside. I'd seen the briefcases and said, what you saw doesn't go out of this room. There was knowledge from all the team. Back in my Paris hotel as dawn broke, I stared at the ceiling. The passports were mostly safe, but 12 was still ghost in the machine. And those briefcases. Whatever was inside them wasn't fabric samples. The case was closed on the passports, but it had just grown teeth. The city outside hummed with morning traffic, oblivious. I closed my eyes. Exhaustion pulled me under. Tomorrow, I'd call Dixon. Tomorrow, would chase the rest.